Welcome to Towle Talks. Today we start networking. So today we start networking, and networking is probably one of the more challenging elements of game design. It adds an entire new dimension of problems and bugs and errors that can arise in your program. However, Unity does a lot of work for us. Today we're going to go set up a basic networking application for a game that has an authoritarian server. Now, authoritarian server means that the server controls the game state, so that only the server can change objects or change values in the game object, but the clients can send requests or commands, and then the server moves the piece on the board, so to speak. Welcome to the first networking tutorial. Now we're going to get into some pretty advanced stuff, so this is going to be pretty tricky, so please pay attention. I'm going to try to start very slow and work through 3 different tutorials and set it up so when we're done you can create a lobby, you can create your own lobby players, and you can create your own player objects with your own multiplayer scenes. The nice thing about Unity is it gives you a lot of functionality for the network that you don't have to worry about. So there's no more serialization, deserialization of objects, or at least for what you're concerned with, and you can usually let Unity do all the back-end stuff. However, it's still going to be quite tricky. So first of all, I'm going to make a new project. Ignore this object here at the moment. We'll come back to this. I'm going to make a new object, or a new project, and I'm going to have 2 scenes. I'm going to label one scene lobby, which at the moment you only have a main camera and a directional light, and make a game scene. Likewise, we'll just have a main camera and a directional light. Now, Unity, starting at 5.1, changed their networking system substantially, and so they added this lobby manager, lobby player. It's imperative that you upgrade to Unity 5.5 because they fixed a lot of bugs, or I may overstate. I mean, perhaps they weren't bugs, but they fixed a lot of things that were confusing for players, such as the rating system. So, now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a network manager. So we're going to create a new object, game object, create empty. We'll call it network manager, and you're just going to have a transform on it. But what you're going to do is you're going to move down here and add component, and say network, and say network lobby manager. Now, I could do this demo with just a network manager, and it would only have the game scene. We wouldn't have the lobby scene. But since most, if not all, multiplayer games require a lobby, usually this is a good place to start. So say lobby manager. And if we want, we can also go to add script network and add network HUD, which we will. Normally you would not use this on a deployed product, but for a proof of concept and learning you can use this. Likewise up here, show lobby GUI, normally you're not going to use this, but for proof of concept you can. Now, the first thing you need to think about is we need to have 2 scenes, the lobby scene and the play scene, which we just created. However, before you just simply drag these objects on, you have to save the 2 scenes, and then you have to add them to your build. So you go to File, Build Settings, and make sure your 2 scenes are loaded. And for this tutorial, please make sure your scenes lobby is first, and then the scenes game scene is after that. So you have to make sure the 2 scenes are here. You can either do Add Open Selected, or I believe you can actually just drag and drop the scene. Yeah, you can drag and drop the scene onto this window. The other thing you probably want to do is go to File or Edit, Project Settings, Player, and say Run in Default, or Run in Background. So make sure this is checked here. So now that we have this finished, let's move back to what's happening here. So go back to our network manager. We'll notice the other 2 things we have to do. We can, of course, set the max number of players. Max players per connections 1. Unity does allow you to have a couch multiplayer system, so you have multiple people on the same machine. I'm not going to go into this lecture, but I'll talk briefly about the complications of that. But right now, we'll say 1 player per connection. And then it's going to ask for a lobby player prefab and a game player prefab. So the game player prefab, this is going to be your object. This is going to be your character. This is going to be your thing when you're in multiplayer. This is going to be the network lobby player, or your kind of your seat when you're sitting in the lobby waiting for the game to start. So at the moment, we're going to go to player, and we're going to go to prefabs. And what we're going to do is, if you don't have, since you don't have this, go to game object, create empty, create empty. And what we're going to do is, so you'll have like this, call it network lobby player, and add a network identity, and add, or actually just add network, go to add component network and add network lobby player. It'll automatically add the network identity script. You have to have this script, or more importantly, a script you can inherit on this object in order for this to be a player. Once you have this set up, you don't have to change anything. Just hit apply, and then you can delete and then drag it to your prefab folder, and then you can delete. For the player object, real quickly, we're gonna go into more detail with the player object, but the player object, do the same thing, game object, create empty, and just simply add a network identity. We're gonna come back and we're gonna talk about network player and explain what's going on here. But all you have to do for a network player is to have a network identity. So just make an empty object and put a network identity on it, and then drag it to the prefab for your player object. So once I have my two prefabs set up, I'm going to go back to my network manager, and I have to drag and drop the lobby player here and the player object here. Likewise, on my scenes, I should be able to set my scenes now. If I drag this over and I can't drop it, that means it's not part of my build settings yet. We want to, you don't have to worry about network information. We want to auto create player, that's true. And everything else should be the same. So now we're going to set up our game. Now, there's a couple things that are going to go wrong here, but as we can try running it right now, and we can see the effect. So if I go File, Build and Run, so I'm going to build a standalone version. So now we have it up. We're going to make sure it's windowed, make sure it's small. We'll hit play, and then likewise over here, we'll hit play on our editor. When you play it with the editor, you will get some weird lag, and this can be very difficult when you're trying to debug, say, a race condition, which we'll talk about later. I'll tell you how to avoid it. So here it's going to come up. Oops, I think I'm in the wrong script. I'm in the wrong scene. Sorry. So here it comes up. I can host from either one. So the host is going to be the server. The client will not be will be the one connecting to the server. The server will be the one who's in charge of the game. And we'll talk about this. This will be very important later, but the server will be the authoritarian figure in the game. So we'll land host on the here. You can see I have one player. It says I'm not ready. I can't expand this, but if I could, you see this windows here. And then here I'll do land client. And now it's hard to see, but right here it says ready is false. And here is my player, and you can see over here player 2, ready is false. So now I've connected. If I hit start here, notice it says ready is true. This was fixed in Unity 5.5. If I hit start here, now the game starts, everyone says they're ready. You will not have the cubes, so don't worry about the cubes right now. But you notice that this is where we're going to get to. Each player controls their cube separately, and the cubes are, the change is reflected on both clients. So this is what we're trying to get to right now. So go ahead and just stop this, stop that, and then we'll get back to our development. So the next thing we want to talk about is the network behavior, because we're going to make a script, and it's going to be a normal C# script. However, instead of inheriting from mono behavior, we're going to say using Unity engine.networking, and we're going to inherit from network behavior, not mono behavior. Now, when I do this, I get a lot more functionality for networks, and my life becomes a lot easier. However, I need to understand how this behavior works. I strongly recommend going through the manual and just going through the multiplayer networking, especially the network behavior component. This one explains the concept of what's happening. This picture is invaluable. So when we have our game, we're going to have our client. The client is going to put inputs like keyboard, mouse, whatever. From these inputs, we're going to compose and send a command to the server. And we're also going to send the radius command to the server, as well as connecting and disconnecting from the server. It's kind of self-explanatory. But when we send commands to the server is going to use the player object and determine what to do to the object. And then if something's created, if something's changed, if something else happens, the game state must be reflected on the server, which then should be reflected across all the different objects on the clients. It's very easy, if you're not careful, to have one client get out of sync or have one client try to take control of the object, and you won't see, like one screen you'll see the character moving, the other screen you will not. So in order to understand this, basically think of a board game, but you can't actually touch any of the pieces on the board. You have to tell one person, okay, roll the dice, move my characters that many spaces, draw a card, use this card, okay, my turn's done. But you don't actually get to touch the board or any of the pieces. That's kind of what's happening here. You're going to send input of what you want to do. You're going to send the command to the server. The server is going to do it, or see if you can do it, and then the changes will be reflected back to you. The client, if you're a client, you will never, ever change a game state. The only thing you might change is perhaps some sort of UI setting that does not affect the game. But you will not change how much health you have. You will not change whether or not there's a wall there. You will not change how many keys or how many coins you've gotten or how much health you have. All of the game state is going to go on the server side. So it's important we understand that. So starting this off, I'm going to say network behavior, and then I'm going to have a public rigid body my rig. But now the only thing that can move this object is, in fact, the server. So I'm going to have this variable. It's actually belongs to network behavior, so I don't have it declared. But it's going to say if is server. Is server means I am the server or I'm the host. Either one, this will be true. If that's true, you're going to say you're going to get the rigid body component from the object. Why don't I do this on the client? Because the client will never move or should never move this object. Again, here's two different options I have. If is server, this means I'm the server. If is client, this means I'm a client. If is local player, this means that this player corresponds to the current person, the computer. Now this is very this is very useful because trying to figure out which player belongs to who is very difficult. Without this function, our lives would be a lot more difficult. So this is local player will be imperative. This means that this player represents the player for the current computer. So here I'm going to say, remember our little picture I just closed, I want my inputs. So this is the local player, and this will also work for host. That means a server that's also running a player. So we'll say float mx equals input.get axis horizontal, float my.input.get axis vertical, and then we're going to say command move and send an mx and my. Now on that website I just closed, it talked about commands and RPCs. Really, well, I shouldn't say that. You may need RPCs, but generally commands and var syncs are going to be the most popular thing you need. So in this case, we're going to have a command, and so when we make a command, it's like having a function, but I have to have this little label in front of it. So it's square brackets command capital C, and I get this as long as I have imported Unity Engine.networking. Now, I also have to have CMD in the beginning of my method. I do not need the underscore. That's my own personal preference, but I do need CMD with a capital C, lowercase m and d. So like I was saying, here we have if is local player means that the current computer corresponds this player or this character as their, or this object as their player. So I'm going to get my float mx and my for my inputs, and I'm going to send it to command. And like I said, command has to start with cmd, just like does not require the underscore, but requires the cmd and requires the label command, or the pre option command. And then I'm going to send in my two values. These values are limited to what I can send in. Basically, it has to form to a float, integer, string, long, double, or actually I don't think doubles will work, and vectors, like a vector, a set of numbers, can be transferred into this command. So you have to be very careful what you're trying to, and game objects can also be sent in. But so you have to be kind of careful what you send into the command. Now this command is only going to run on the server. So this is, remember our little picture, this is the client is getting their inputs and sending what they want to do to the server, and the server is actually going to move the object. My rig.velocity equals new vector mx0 my. I'm actually moving the vertical aspect, I'm moving it on the z-axis. So that's what's happening right here. Again, only the server even knows what my rig is. The client doesn't even know what this server is, or my rig is. So we're done with that. Minimize that. And now we're going to go back to our player prefab. And right now, I think, if I remember correctly, you just added a network identity. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a rigid body, freeze the rotations, and on interpolate, we can do interpolate, extrapolate, or none. Now, now this is useful because in our networking, this is going to become more important. So we're going to do interpolate. I find it better. You can play around with that. We're also going to go to add a component network transform, and we're going to sync on the rigid body 3D. And here you can send how often this object sends. A rate of 10 is 10 per second. This isn't horrible. You probably can do a little bit better than this, but this is a good place to start. Then we can actually add the network player, the script that we just had, and then we don't have to set anything because we look for our own rigid body. Now, if I forgot to add the network transform, what would happen is one player would move, but the client would not see it. So because I have a network transform here, this is going to watch this value, and whenever this changes, it's going to reflect the change across the network, assuming it's the server. So if you forget this step here, and even if your code is correct, only one of your objects is going to move. Now, if I build and run, which I don't actually have to do, so no. And here I will, what you have to do is, of course, then assuming you have the same player object, you have to make sure it's added to the network manager. But here I'll do a host this time on my standalone. I'll do a client on my editor. I'll say start. This says true. I'll say start. The game starts. Now I have two blocks spawned at the same point. If I click on one window, I should be able to move one block. But remember, only the server is moving it. So only this program per se, this is the server, is moving the block. If I click on this, I can move the other block, but what's happening is I'm sending commands to the server, and this server is actually moving the block. So that will conclude our first tutorial on networking. This has been Towle Talks. Thanks for watching. Next time we're going to talk about how to get information from the lobby to the game itself.